stay close enough to the mic that all of you can hear me, and also that requires me to modulate my natural tendency to wander. So if at any point you guys can't hear me, do just let me know. Also, as Sharon said, I'm a lawyer by training. I can stand up here without any problems at all for the next 50 minutes and talk, but that's not nearly as interesting for me as if you guys ask me questions. So I'm happy to take questions throughout the course of the presentation. If you guys see something on the slides that you'd like me to dive into in a little bit more detail, just raise your hand, and I'm happy to go down any rabbit hole that you guys would like to go down. So when I do these kinds of presentations, and I talk to ethics weeks on a fairly regular basis, one of the things I always like to do is to try to set a little bit of a stage. So if I can get my little ruler. Yeah. There we go. Okay, so just a little bit of an agenda. I'm going to talk a little bit about the macro environment. Some of this is going to be very familiar content to you all. Some of it will be new. I'm then going to talk a little bit about where our data comes from, because anytime I stand up and talk about our data set, I like to make sure that you all have some context on where the data is coming from. And then we're going to talk about two things that are going to be of particular relevance to this audience. So as you guys are thinking about what your next moves look like, what your career direction is going to look like, we're going to talk a little bit about how to tell whether you're joining the kind of company that is going to ultimately support doing business with integrity. We're going to talk about why managers matter, and how you, as you're evaluating organizations, think about that, and then how companies can engage individuals who are responsible for leading people. Okay. Macro environment. Who is familiar with the Transparency International Corruption Perceptions Index? Anybody? Oh, I got one hand. Nice. So the Transparency International is a global anti-corruption organization. They're an NGO that does an annual corruption perceptions index. And basically what they do is they go out to individuals working in countries or doing business in particular jurisdictions, and they ask them a series of questions about how hard it is to get business done in the jurisdiction that they're operating in. And based on all of that data, their data and the survey data, and then other data that comes out from other non-governmental organizations, they come up with a corruption perceptions index. And they rank every country from 1 to 182. The red countries are the countries where it is extremely difficult to do business without paying bribes. Very difficult to get anything done, to get a permit, to build a building, to ship your goods, to bring your goods in from outside of the country, to bring your people in, to get a visa. All of those things require some sort of an interaction with a government official that prevents you from being able to engage in those transactions easily. The more yellow countries are places where there's much less of that. So from a color perspective, you want to be on the yellow end of the spectrum. You can see that most of the Norwegian countries, Canada, Norway, Finland, Sweden are on the yellowest end of the spectrum. They're at the very top, meaning they're the least corrupt places to do business, all the way down to places like Russia and most of Latin America, where it's a lot more challenging. So what this means for large multinational organizations who are subject to anti-corruption legislation like the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act or the UK Bribery Act, they have to be extremely cautious when they do business in these jurisdictions, because their people are going to be regularly put in positions where they're being asked to violate the law. From an ethics and compliance perspective, it's a major risk for organizations. At the same time, we've got the regulators coming out with additional guidance on what a good program looks like. Yeah? Oh, okay. Stand a little closer. Okay. Okay. Is anybody having trouble hearing me? You can't hear me. You can't hear me. You can't hear me. You're not having trouble. Thank you. So the reason that I always show the regulatory update slide when I'm doing these conversations is because if you are an organization in any one of the Western countries, corporations are a legal fiction, right? They can sue, they can be sued, they can enter into contracts, they can agree to pay people for things, but they can't actually do anything, right? That requires people. And so at the end of the day, what the primary role of an ethics and compliance officer is it is to mitigate people-created risk, right? It's to manage the risk that my people are out there in the world somewhere doing something that I, the company, am going to be held responsible for. And one of the ways that you mitigate that risk is by having what the government calls a creditworthy program. So in the event that Sharon is in Venezuela and she pays a bribe to get herself out of the country, and she's doing that as part of her responsibilities for my business, I'm on the hook for that decision by Sharon. Unless I've told Sharon repeatedly and trained her not to pay the bribe when she's trying to get out of Venezuela, right? That's the kind of analysis you do when you think about what a creditworthy program looks like. And the government came out in April with new guidance on how they are going to consider whether you have a creditworthy program. And there are a couple of key things that were in that guidance that were intriguing to the industry. One was policies, right? Policy development and making sure that your policies are both what I call literally accessible and linguistically accessible. When the average lawyer writes a document, they're not writing for the average employee, right? They are writing for another lawyer because that's how they're trained to write. We like our whereases, we like our heretofores. My average sentence length when I write something is 22 words, which is, way more words than you need. But I'm paid by the word in many cases as an attorney, so I write a lot of words. What the government has basically said is if you have a manufacturing employee base and you write a policy that is written at a PhD level, you have failed the test of whether your policy is literally and linguistically accessible. So I would challenge you guys, this is kind of a fun exercise, go look at some of the university's policies, right, and see whether or not you can actually understand them. Chances are good they were written by the university's lawyers and not by their comms folks, and so you're not going to necessarily understand those policies. And that's one of the primary challenges that we have as ethics and compliance professionals is to figure out how do I write for my employee base? A, how do I figure out who my employee base is at this point, because that's changing so dramatically. And B, how do I effectively write for that part of my organization? It's the reason that communications expertise is the fastest growing skill set that is desired by compliance and ethics groups inside organizations. Who can write and communicate effectively are incredibly valuable in today's job market. Training can't be one size fits all. I heard this analogy when I was in Bangalore about a week and a half ago. They were talking about the fact that the algorithmic shopping experience, the customized shopping experience, is now something that we all expect in our workplace, right? I go on to Everlene's website and I look at a pair of shoes. I anticipate that those shoes are then going to follow me around for the next week and a half, right? Every time I open any internet browser, all of a sudden there are going to be those shoes. I now expect the same thing at work. So if you can need training on know your customer rules, which is a very financially services specific anti-money laundering statute, and I never interact, right? I'm in human resources. What you have basically said to me is, I don't know what you do. I don't really care what you do. I'm just going to make you take this training so I can check that box. It is not something that's going to satisfy either the government or the employee base any longer. You guys are entitled to expect customized training that matches the job you do, and the government expects your companies to do that with you. Managers matter. We're going to talk a lot about why they matter and get into our data and stories. The government, for the first time ever, emphasized storytelling as a primary way of communicating, which makes a tremendous amount of sense because that's how we're all hardwired to learn in the first place. All right. OFAC also came out with their own new set of regulations. I always feel bad for OFAC because they do this right after the DOJ does it, every time. DOJ issued new guidance in February of 2017. OFAC issued theirs in March. DOJ issued new guidance in April of 2019. OFAC issued theirs in May. Nobody pays any attention to it because the DOJ has just come out with new stuff. But OFAC also came out with new stuff, and this is particularly relevant to anybody in the financial services sector. So if you're interested in working in a bank, you're going to be hearing a lot about OFAC regulations. But basically what they said is something very similar, talking about the need to make sure that your program matches your risks. So that's the macro environment from a regulatory perspective. The other really interesting thing, and John and I were just talking about this, is the way that investors are starting to look at organizations. Anybody have a rough estimate on how much is under investment in so-called ESG funds right now?
One ESG fund.
Okay. Anybody know what an ESG fund is?
Some should.
So an ESG fund is a fund that says we care about your environmental, social, and governance performance, right? We're not just going to look at your quarterly performance. We're not just going to look at your financial performance. We are interested in making a long-term investment in a business that is sustainable. And by sustainable, we mean that you are going to continue to have your license to operate inside of society because you care about more than just profit, right? It's consistent with the statement that just came out a couple of weeks ago from the Business Roundtable, where 188 CEOs of some of the largest multinational companies said, we are not solely focused on shareholder profit, right? The mission of the corporation is to serve all of our stakeholders. By serving all of our stakeholders, we will ultimately serve the shareholder, but our sole focus is no longer going to be just shareholder profitability. And so an ESG fund is a fund that specifically analyzes an organization and looks for more than just quarter-over-quarter financial performance. There's $7.2 trillion in ESG funds right now. $7.2 trillion. It's an enormous chunk of the investment market, and it's growing dramatically year over year. And it's getting the attention of a lot of companies who are saying, okay, I need to start telling my story in a very different way than I used to. My 10K and my quarterly statement is not going to be everything that everybody's going to look at. They're also going to look at how am I engaging with my employees? What does my diversity and inclusion policy look like? How am I engaging with the communities that I do business in? All of these things are starting to matter a lot more to organizations than they did a couple of years ago. And part of the reason for that is the amount of company asset that is intangible. In the 1970s, 72% of the average organization's assets was tied up in tangible resources, right? It was stuff. It was buildings, it was factories, it was widgets, it was raw materials, it was chairs, it was goods, right? Now 70% of the average organization's assets are intangible. It's brand, it's reputation, it's consumer loyalty. Totally different analysis when you think about it from an integrity perspective, and it requires a different way of measuring an organization and a different way of telling your story. Trust in business is rising around the world. This is some of my favorite data to share. It comes from the Edelman Trust Barometer. Edelman is a PR firm in New York that does a ton of research into trust. And they have been doing this research over the course of the last several years. And one of the things that came out in the February 2019 data is that the company I work for, my individual employer, is now the most trusted organization. They beat the media, they beat academic institutions, they beat the government by a factor of like 12. They beat everyone. And equally importantly, the vast majority of employees, 76% of employees, expect their CEOs to take a position on social issues. They expect it. And when they don't see it happen, they want to know why. And there are thousands of examples out there, if you look at it over the course of the last year, of organizations that are trying to figure out how to navigate this appropriately, whether it's Delta Airlines and some of the decisions that their CEO has made, whether it is Dick's Sporting Goods deciding not to sell guns any longer, what Walmart just did, with some of the decisions that they have made, Microsoft and their response to the Dreamers. And they came out and said, basically, if you want our 181 Dreamers, you have to go through us first. Those are particular social issues that they, as an organization, made a decision to weigh in on, where it may not have seemed natural for them to do that. But it is something that employees are increasingly expecting that their organizations will do. Okay. We talked a little bit about this, about assets. Heard that already. Some of you may have seen this already. As we think about how to evaluate companies, one of the things that Ethisphere is best known for is something called the World's Most Ethical Companies list. It's an annual list of rankings that we do every year. And one of the things that we do is we track the stock performance of organizations on that list. And we compare that performance to other large cap indices, like the S&P 500 or the MSCI Global Index. And what we find year after year, we've been doing this list for 14 years now, every year there is a substantial financial premium associated with the companies that make the list. Now, it's not because they're on the list, right? But the companies that make the list outperform their competitors over the long run. For the 5-year review, it's 14.4%. For the 3-year review, it's 8.2%. It's a substantial difference in financial performance. Now, I'm always very honest, what we have here is correlation. I'm not saying that we have causation. But the things that I think we are seeing that lead to the correlation are things like lower turnover. You have more engaged employees, right? You have employees who feel like they understand why they're doing what they're doing, and they show up every day at a company that they want to work at. It means you do more for your employer. You're not just looking at it as a job. Also, turnover is enormously expensive, right? Hiring the wrong person is about $150,000 a saving by each role, right? In terms of the amount of time it takes you to rehire for that role, the amount of time that role stays in. The other piece of this is there is no P&L on earth that has a line item for fines and penalties. When you get yourself in trouble, that money is coming out of something else. It's coming out of research and development. It's coming out of new market acquisition. It's coming out of acquiring a competitor. It's coming out of growing a part of the company, right? That money is money you are not spending because you're spending it on lawyers. And so whether it is an organization like Walmart, where, as a result of their anti-corruption issues in Mexico and India, they spent $850 million putting a program in place. Right? $850 million. Think about what they could have done with $850 million, right? They were not planning on spending that money, but they were put in a position where they had to. You look at what Uber has spent, right, in responding to some of the challenges that they have had. You look at the money that WeWork is spending right now, responding to some of the challenges that they are having and canceling their IPO, right? Revoking the filing of their S1. So all of those things are the kinds of things that the companies on our list don't have to do. They can take that $850 million and put it somewhere else. So those are some of the things that I think are the causation that lead to this particularly strong correlation. All right, so what does that mean for you guys? I'm going to cover our data set really fast, and then I'll get into some of the manager data that we have, because I think it's the place that you'll find this most helpful. All right, so the data set, just to cover it really quickly, these are the companies in the data that I'll be citing on manager training practices. It's from this year's World's Most Ethical Companies list, so you can see we've got a mix of public and private, we've got all sizes, we've got 60 different countries represented as part of the list, and all sizes as well. For the culture data that I'll be citing, and I'm going to get to that first because I think it's some of the most interesting work that we do, we've got just shy now of 500,000 current employee responses, representing about 3 million employees overall, 53 companies around the world. And these are the things we measure when we look at culture. We think of culture particularly from the perspective of an ethics and compliance professional. So what are the factors that would cause my people to break the rules? Do they understand the rules? Are they under pressure to break the rules? Do they trust their managers? Do they trust their supervisors? And equally importantly, when they do something stupid, will they tell me? Right? Those are the things that, as a compliance professional, I care about the most. So those are the things that we measure. All right, so what do we find? The single most influential person on your behavior at work is your manager. Hands down, bar none. We can talk about tone at the top until we're all blue in the face. The fact of the matter is, most of you in your day-to-day work are not going to be interfacing with the CEO, right? You're not going to be interfacing with the CFO. You're not going to be interfacing with the chief human resources officer. You are going to be working for somebody farther down in the hierarchy, and that person is the person that influences your behavior. If they're rounding their cab receipts, guess what? You're rounding your cab receipts. If they're entering into side letters with customers, guess what? You're entering into side letters with customers because they're the ones that are showing you what success looks like at the business. And I can show you what that looks like in the numbers in terms of manager perception. So, one of the questions we ask as part of the culture survey is, hypothetically speaking, would you be willing to raise your hand? And hypothetically speaking, the vast majority of people say, of course I would. Absolutely, without question. If I saw something, I would say something. 92.2% say, yes, absolutely, I would say something. Delta between the hypothetical and the real, 40%. Third column. 36.5%. I won't round up. 36.5% drop between the hypothetically speaking, absolutely if I saw something, I would say something, and the people who actually did say something. What's the reason for that drop? Anybody want to guess what the number one reason that somebody says they didn't raise a concern?
Repercussion.
Fear of retaliation. What? Something bad's going to happen to me. Yeah. What's the repercussion of my raising my hand? Right? What's the repercussion of my raising my hand? And one of the things that plays into that the most is this question of whether or not my manager is going to support me in raising the concern. When we ask people, why didn't you report the misconduct that you observed? The second most common reason is my manager prefers to keep things inside the team. And so I didn't feel like I could raise it. And this is a fascinating exercise in human psychology, right? We're watching it play out right now in real time on the highest stage. You have a CEO, right? A CEO type figure in President Trump trying to unmask a whistleblower. Why should he be allowed to anonymously accuse him? That plays out inside organizations all the time. All the time. Barclays CEO over in the UK recently paid a giant fine for trying to unmask a whistleblower because they're protected for a reason. It is an enormous act of bravery to raise your hand and say, I saw something wrong. And the reason so many people don't do it is because they're afraid of what's going to happen if they do. So, fear of retaliation, 54.4%, followed by nothing's going to happen, why bother? Right, and so that's a lack of faith in the organization's commitment to organizational justice. I call it the George Orwell rule. Anybody in the room read Animal Farm? Yeah. Are all the animals equal, or are some of the animals more equal than others? Right? That's the heart of organizational justice. Are the rules going to be applied fairly when something happens? And where do I go if I do have the courage to raise a concern? I go to my manager, right? This is the person I go to with all of my questions. I'm most likely to use that channel to raise a concern. So in 60% of the cases where somebody actually had the courage to say, I saw something and I said something, the person they said it to was their manager. And that is one of the places where they are the least satisfied with how the process went. So as you think about being a manager, right? You think about being promoted to lead people. Who are the people who are most likely to be promoted to lead? They're the people who are good at doing the job they were doing before, right? That's how we end up promoting most of our managers. Oh, you're really good at this. Why don't you lead this team? It's not because they have any idea how to manage people, right? You've all worked for bad managers, and if you haven't worked for bad managers yet, I can promise you, you will, right? And there's a reason why the saying is, people don't leave jobs, they leave managers. They leave people who are not inspiring them to do business the way they want to be doing business. And part of the reason why that ends up happening is because corporations do such a bad job preparing people to manage. And it's incumbent on us as businesses to get much better at that. So the average person who becomes a frontline manager for the first time, they have no supervisory experience, they are going to get a training on how to manage the performance evaluation system, how to approve time off requests, and how to sign off on expense reports. That's what they're going to get, right? Will they get a training on how to have a difficult conversation with somebody who's not doing their job? Maybe, but often not. Will they get a training on how to make people feel comfortable asking questions and raising concerns? Increasingly, we are seeing that, but we're seeing that in the diversity and inclusion context, right? So we're seeing trainings for managers around how do I make people feel like they can raise their voice in a meeting. Do you guys have any of you guys seen the increasingly common notices on meeting room walls that say this is a safe space, or this is a team space, or this is an inclusive space, you should feel comfortable raising your voice, right? That's a diversity and inclusion conversation. The good news is, from an integrity perspective, the message is the same, right? If I'm comfortable showing up with my whole self at work, That means that I am comfortable talking about what I did over the weekend, no matter who I did it with, right? It means I'm comfortable talking about a new client idea. It means I'm comfortable challenging my manager. It means I'm comfortable saying, hey, I think you've got a conflict of interest. All of those things are part of the same conversation, part of the same environment. So making sure that managers understand why that's so important is one of the things we see a lot of organizations doing, because it goes to this question of, I said something to my manager and nothing happened. Right? When you dig into that low satisfaction number with reporting to a manager, that's what you find under there. I thought John had a conflict of interest. I took it to Sharon. Sharon buried it. She didn't do anything with it. So this company doesn't really care about conflicts of interest. I sit through that training on an annual basis, and I know that it's bullshit. Because I raised a concern and nothing happened. You know what happens when I have that attitude? I leave. Right? I leave. If you're lucky, I leave. Or I'm really upset and I make a lot of noise about it and I wind up at the SEC if you're a publicly traded company, because I've got a concern that potentially impacts your financial performance, and then the SEC pays me whistleblower bounties, which is a disaster for the organization, especially when they have to pay a multiplier on top of that because I raised it internally first and they decided to ignore it. But the fact of the matter is the ethics and compliance team never had any idea, because Sharon took what I told her, put it in the back of her head, and didn't raise it to anybody. That is an incredibly common scenario, and it's part of the reason why, as you're all thinking about where you go, one of the things to think about is how well prepared are the managers. And here's, I love this chart. Here's an eye chart example of exactly why it matters. So one of the questions we ask as part of the survey work is, how often does your manager talk about ethics-related topics? And this doesn't have to be, a super formal conversation where somebody stands up and says, now let's talk about the anti-corruption policy, right? It can be a conversation about how they handled a difficult vendor dialogue, how, one of my colleagues got a request in Thailand for a kickback, and here's how they handled that, right? There's so many different ways that you can have these kinds of conversations. And the idea is that you're making decisions out loud. So I was talking to a friend of mine whose daughter just got her driver's license, and one of the things that she's doing right now when she drives with her is she is narrating her internal dialogue about everything she sees on the road. Now I see that car, I'm not really certain that they're going to stop at the light, so I'm going to go kind of slow before I gun it through this light so that we don't get hit. She's doing all of that out loud. And she's doing it to try to show her daughter all the things you have to think about when you're driving a car. If you're a good manager, chances are you've internalized a lot of that dialogue. And so one of the things we see a lot of companies doing right now is encouraging managers to have that dialogue out loud. Right? Start to narrate the thought process when you think about how to respond to a difficult client. Start to narrate the thought process when you think about how to respond to an RFP. Right? Start to narrate the thought process as you prepare to have a difficult performance conversation. Because that's how your employees understand all the various pieces that go into decision making. And those are the kinds of conversations that we see having a tremendous impact. So what we ask is, how often does your manager talk about ethics and compliance related issues? The green dots represent those employees who say, my manager talks about it all the time, monthly or more often than monthly. The red dots are the numbers. And the fascinating thing to me is the things that that delta has an impact on. Right? So would you, for example, expect the delta to be that large on senior leadership at step? We asked two questions in this particular pillar. We asked, do they talk the talk and do they walk the walk? Everybody scores great on talk the talk, right? Upwards of 90%. Senior leadership talks about the importance of doing business with integrity. Right? That's easy. Average organization, that delta is about 30% between those who say they talk that way and those who say they act that way. And a big part of that delta ends up hiding between those employees whose managers talk about ethics and compliance issues frequently versus those who talk about them not. So your manager's behavior, your behavior as a manager, has a direct impact on my perception of the leadership team and the organization. Same thing ends up happening, not as surprisingly, in comfort level approaching my manager with issues. If my manager never talks about decision making, I'm going to be less comfortable knocking on their door and saying, hey, I've got something I need to talk to you about. Faith that the manager complies with the non-retaliation policy, right? Number one reason somebody doesn't raise a concern is something bad's going to happen in April. The less comfortable I am that my manager complies with the company's non-retaliation policy, the less likely I am to raise a concern, okay? And one of the places that we see that delta really showing up is in that question of whether the manager is frequently. We're talking about ethics and compliance issues. My peers acting ethically, not as much of a surprise. Observing unethical behavior. This one's an interesting one to me. Right? So if your manager talks about ethics and compliance topics regularly, you are more likely to say that you have observed something. And the reason for that, when we've dug into those numbers, is those people recognize when somebody's doing something wrong, more than the people whose managers are not talking about those issues on a regular basis. So as you are thinking about organizations and evaluating them yourself, either as as an investor or as somebody who's looking to join a particular organization, one of the things to ask yourself is, what am I seeing in these communications around how these companies are approaching the issue of doing business with them? All right, how are companies prepping managers? Because this is one of the questions I always get. Okay, great, you've shown me all these reasons that managers matter. As a manager, what can I actually do about it? Manager training. So 73% of our data set are training all their managers on something more than just the mandatory sexual harassment training. Right? So many states at this point have legislation that you have to send your managers through a certain amount of sexual harassment training. The Me Too movement has made it so that that's a bigger focus for a lot of organizations. But a lot of companies in the data set that we have are going beyond that and saying, no, I'm actually giving my managers some of that. Here's how to have a difficult conversation. Here's what open door reporting can feel like. Here's what happens when we do an investigation. This is always a fascinating one to me. So many employees think that if I complain about Sharon on Tuesday and she hasn't been frog marched out the front door with her box by Thursday, that the company's not doing anything about it. The average amount of time that it takes a company to conduct an ethics and compliance investigation for most organizations is north of 75 days. It's a process, right? Companies take it seriously. If you raise a concern and it's being investigated, they're going to talk to a bunch of people, they're going to pull a bunch of documents, they're going to look at a bunch of email traffic. It takes time. It takes time. And, equally importantly, depending on what it is I complained about, the possible outcome of every substantiated investigation is not Sharon getting frog marched by security at the front door with her things in a box, right? She could have coaching. She could have lost a bonus. She could be denied a promotion. There's a range of disciplinary actions that are available to companies, but we've done such a good job with emphasizing the up to and including termination part that people think the only possible outcome is termination. And so we have to undo that story. And part of how you undo it is by training your managers on what actually happens when something comes up and how they should engage employees around these issues. They're conducting it pretty regularly, not just upon promotion, but on a regular basis for the majority of organizations that we work with. And they're talking about a lot of different things, right? They're talking about a lot of different things. They're talking to managers about how much impact they have on their employees. A lot of managers, you start the process of doing manager training, because I've done some of this training before, and you open up the floor and you say, who do you think has the greatest influence on your employees' behavior at work? And the answers are the CEO, the rest of the leadership team, their personal, people in their family, their mom, right? In some cases, it's very rare for a manager to know that the answer to that question is me, right? It's something you have to educate them on. And so talking about why it's so important that you promote a culture of ethics and compliance, why it's so important that you make sure your employees are comfortable speaking up. One of my favorite trainings that I've been to recently is they're actually using improv techniques. So anybody familiar with the improv technique, yes and? Yeah. And it's fun, right? It's a fun exercise. It's basically, somebody makes a statement and you say, yes, and let's also do this. And then they say, yes, and let's also do that. And the thing that it teaches a manager is you're not waiting for a pause in the conversation to make your point, right? The other one they're using a lot is last word. So Sharon says a sentence, and I have to use the last word she said as the first word of my sentence. Again, it trains me to listen. It trains me to listen to the whole sentence, right? Not just the piece that I'm going to then respond to. I've also seen a lot of companies talking to managers about putting their phone down, right? Giving somebody the gift of your full attention, because the gift they are giving you is information. And the information might suck, right? It might. It absolutely might. Often managers get information that kind of sucks, right? But you have to look at the information itself as a gift. And if you look at the information itself as a gift, then you're approaching the conversation with your employee from a different perspective. And that's the place that you start to get the stuff that the company can actually do something with, right? Is if you have that attitude. It's the folks at US Bank call it an attitude of gratitude. Even if I don't want the information, I'm going to have an attitude of gratitude that you're giving it to me in the first place. Handling reports, employee reports or concerns, where do I go, right? There are so many managers that you start to have this conversation with them and they look at you, deer in the headlights, and they say, but I don't know how to do an investigation. Good. We don't want you to do the investigation. That's not your job. Your job is to take the information and pass it to the right person. Don't try to do the investigation yourself. Identifying and preventing retaliation. So when you look at the information on retaliation, you look at the people who say they've experienced retaliation, more often than not, it's not retaliation, what we would consider retaliation under the law. It's, I stopped getting invited to the meetings. People stopped asking me to lunch. People started going out for happy hours without me. My PTO got denied. That one's getting a little closer to the legal retaliation line. My personal favorites, my desk was moved farther away from the bathroom, or my desk was moved closer to the bathroom, or my desk was moved closer to the microwave, right? Those are the kinds of things that employees experience as retaliation when they raise their hand. Managers are typically trained on retaliation under the law, which is you can't take any kind of tangible employment action against somebody who raises a concern. From an ethics and compliance perspective, I'm much more concerned about the stuff that chills the atmosphere for people to be raising their hand. And those are the kinds of things that managers control. Don't pull somebody who's raised a concern off the good client projects. Try your best to treat them exactly how you treat them before. Because as soon as you raise your hand and you you make that complaint, you call the hotline, you fill out the form, you submit the information, your antenna as an employee is up. And it is up for anything that's happening in the workplace that feels different than Tuesday, right? And as a manager, it's really critically important that I understand that, and then I'm committed to making sure that that doesn't happen to the folks across my organization. And a lot of in-person training. This is the kind of stuff that traditionally you want to role play. It's very hard to do yes and in a WebEx, right? So we're seeing a lot of this done as a committed in-person exercise. And don't just do it as training, right? This is the last point that I'll make for you guys. The average Zillennial, which I guess is what we're calling the generation after millennials, your millennials and then your Zillennials. The average Zillennial has an 8-second attention span. Okay? So I've lost all of you guys 148 times already, right? The average American adult learner needs to hear something 7 times before they really understand it. And so that means that you can't one and done with your managers. You need to go back to them, you need to refresh this, and you need to give them different modalities that they can then use to communicate with their employees. Maybe you're working at an organization where the thing is blogs, right? Everybody loves blogs. Maybe you're podcasting. Maybe you're doing infographics. Maybe cartoons are your jam, right? Whatever the case may be, figure out how it is that your employees want to be communicated with and give the managers, the most influential group, the tools necessary to do that. Because the only way your message is going to resonate is if you repeat it and you make it understandable and you make it short. To accommodate where the employee base is today, as I said at the beginning, one size fits all doesn't work anymore, and you need to make sure that you really are communicating regularly if you're going to try to make it work. And make it easy for managers to tell you what's going on is one of the other things that I wanted to emphasize. The easier it is for your manager to say, hey, I heard this, we've got a conflict of interest issue in Indiana, the more likely it is that managers will actually tell you that, and making sure that managers can put that data right in the case management tool that you're using to raise concerns and monitor them is the easiest way to make sure that happens. So these are just kind of some of the things for you guys to think about as you're evaluating companies, as you're looking at whether these are organizations that are going to ultimately create the kind of culture that allows the kind of performance that we talked about at the front end. It's something that increasingly we're seeing prospective employees really look at very carefully. Prospective employees are looking at company codes of conduct right before they go in to interview. They're looking at mission statements. They're asking, what's the purpose of this company, and is it a purpose that resonates with me? And so telling that story is becoming a bigger piece of the puzzle. So, what questions do you guys have? Yeah.
So I'm in the hospitality kind of industry area, and I've worked a lot of different places, restaurants, hotels, such like that. And I've noticed some employees move up to becoming managers, and I see from the sidelines that they shouldn't really be managers quite yet because they don't understand majority of the stuff. How would you go about picking the correct manager for it?
It's such a good question, and I'm going to guess that the criteria that they're using to pick those managers are seniority in the existing role, and their performance in that role. Yeah, those are very typical considerations that you end up using to pick a manager, right? You're going to go to the person who's been with the company the longest, who's sort of next in line, right? It's their turn. So what we're seeing companies extend that performance evaluation process. We're seeing a lot of psychological testing, right, to figure out whether or not you have the skill set to be able to manage people. We're seeing a lot of 360-degree performance evaluation work, so asking not just the person they work for, but the people they work with to evaluate those individuals before they become eligible for promotion. And those are some of the ways that you can get a much more robust picture of who it is that you're working with. And one of the really interesting things that we see a lot in the hospitality space, I didn't pull this data, but the source of pressure for most people in that space is not the leadership team, it's customers, right? So how are you enabling folks to say no to a blue-chip customer? And that's one of the most important skill sets you can evaluate those managers on because they're going to wind up in those conversations. Yeah?
Is it something fairly common for managers to be evaluated or like supervisors to be evaluated by the people that they're supervising?
Increasingly common. It's called 360-degree evaluation, and it's something we're seeing more and more. So you get evaluations from all of it, and even going to other functions inside the business that you interface with on a regular basis. Sometimes we're starting to see that as part of the 360 as well.
You mentioned earlier that your company has a great culture and environment you feel comfortable with. May I ask
What company I feel? It's more about, I'm talking about more general trends where companies are starting to think about their failure response, right? So this is a big piece of the research that's being done right now. There's some great academic research. Gretchen Rubin has a great book on failure response and looking at what is my response to bad news as an organization, because that impacts my employees' comfort level in raising all kinds of concerns. If my failure response functionality is really about who made the mistake and assigning blame, that's a very different kind of failure response than what happened, right? So asking yourself as an organization, is my failure response who's responsible, or is my failure response what happened? Because if it's what happened, then you've got an environment where people are more likely to raise a concern about anything, right? Something happened with a client, somebody autofilled a email address, and it went to a key competitor, right? Some very sensitive company documents went to a key competitor because of an autofill mistake on Outlook. Are you likely to go to your manager and say, hey, I really screwed up. These documents went to Aaron Straits, and I thought it was the Aaron Straits inside our business, and it turns out it's the Aaron Straits of our competitor. Those kinds of conversations become a lot easier if you've got a what happened failure response as opposed to, oh my God, I can't believe you made that mistake, right? That kind of thing.
You mentioned early in the presentation about that group of CEOs announcing that
The business roundtable?
right,
Yeah.
right. So are they developing kind of ways to judge performance based more on holistic things?
Yes. Yep, absolutely. So, and it's a great question. So they are absolutely looking at additional metrics that they can report on. They're looking at community engagement metrics. So how am I interfacing with the communities that I operate in? Are my employees volunteering in those communities? Am I engaged philanthropically in those communities? What does my supply chain look like from a responsibility perspective? If I work in the tech space, how have I responded to conflicts and errors? Am I looking at modern slavery and human trafficking? Right, those kinds of things that really go to a broader corporate citizen approach. And you see a lot of that in employees' ESG reporting. So one of the things you can take a look at publicly is you can go on a company's website to their investor section. And if they have issued an ESG report, it's going to go into a lot of those broader community engagement metrics as opposed to your proxy or your annual report.
Yeah, one more quick question.
Yeah.
So speaking of ESG and companies looking like get more involved in that, their community involvement, what are some like just basic first steps that companies that like have been doing in the past, they're looking to do that now, what can they like do?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So there are a couple of things that companies are doing. One is go back to who you are as a business and ask what matters to you. So sort of what are the things that are most natural for you to engage in, right? Maybe you are a tech company and making sure that you've got the coders of the future is critical to your business overall and also sort of fits with your general mission and purpose. You might get involved in one of the P-Tech initiatives where these are companies that are funding coding schools for kids who are perhaps not going to go to college, right? You could look at maybe water zero issue, right? And you could get engaged with communities and making sure that the places that you're doing business have access to clean water. So it's really about kind of figuring out first, what is your thing going to be that you can tell a story about that makes sense, right? If you are a retail company, you're probably not going to pick coding, right? That doesn't necessarily tie into who you are as a business. So you want to pick something that is going to match your story and your purpose as an organization, and then you can really inspire your folks to get involved from there. Well, thanks everybody. Really appreciate it.